Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Moore, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is 11/18 of 1996, and I have a sponsor, and my sponsor has a sponsor, and I sponsor a lot of women. I was really nervous about telling people how many people I sponsored because I would get all these old-timers coming up to me and saying, how many people do you sponsor? And I think right now I have 20 women that I sponsor, and maybe I will be able to get to that in my story about how I sponsor that many women. But every meeting I go to, people will come up to me and want me to sponsor them. So I always wonder about how I'm going to start my talk, so I always go to the book, because I know the book always says it the best. I'm going to start off with a little reading out of How It Works. The most misquoted sentence in the whole book. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. And I hope to do that for you, is tell you what I'm like now. I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was a severe alcoholic, and I saw a lot of abuse growing up. I saw my dad stab a fork through my mom's hand, and there was a lot of things going on, and I watched this from a distance, and I thought it was normal. I thought it was really normal to be in a relationship with a family that was so dysfunctional, where my dad was beating my mom, and my mom was beating us, and it was nuts all the time, and it was normal. And when I was 14 years old, my dad died of cirrhosis of the liver, and I met this guy, the guy that was going to save me. And this guy, I met him next door, and I never went next door. And he was the guy that would take me away from that relationship. I got pregnant when I was 15 years old. I married him at 15. I had my first daughter when I was 16 years old. When I was 17, I got divorced. And when I was 18, I started drinking. And it only took me that long because I saw what happened in my family, and I said I would never, ever drink like my dad. And the first night that I drank, I was with a new guy that was going to save me, and he said, Amy, you could just have, a couple of drinks, you'll be fine, I'll protect you. And I thought that was going to be the case. And so he went to the liquor store and bought 4 Jack Daniels Lynchburg lemonades, and he gave me 2, and I drank my 2 down and took his second one and slammed that down and sent him back to the liquor store for more. That was my first experience with alcohol. And I woke up in the bathtub the next day covered in my own vomit. And he was laying on the floor next to me, and he said, Amy, if you ever drink again, I'm going to leave you. And I was like, what could have possibly happened, in one night of drinking that you would leave me? And he said, Amy, I went to the liquor store to get more alcohol, and I came back, and you're trashed, and you're in the shower with another dude. Now, I don't know where I found this guy, I'm in my shower. But I had gone next door and drank everything in their liquor cupboard, including strawberry margarita mix that didn't have any alcohol in it. And I can tell you there was proof all over my house of the strawberry margarita mix. And I promised I would never drink again because I felt horrible the next day. I'm sure my skin was green. I'm sure I had alcohol poisoning. And I felt horrible for a week. I was like, I'm not drinking ever again. And I think it was about a month later that I drank again. And every time I drank, I was a blackout drinker. And all I wanted was more. If there were a couple of drinks, I wouldn't even start drinking. And I started to, play with other substances, these alcohol enhancers so that I could drink longer and I didn't pass out as quickly and, all of these things I started doing. I started self-medicating and trying not to feel all the pain of the things that had happened in the past. And, I was living right outside of the B Street gate in Fort Carson because my husband was stationed in Fort Carson, and I would have all these keg parties at my house. All these guys were over at my house all the time, and it was just nuts. Left and right, it was nuts, and I had this little tiny kid that was there all the time, and And I can tell you that dragging that little girl through the disease of alcoholism is still probably one of the most painful things that I look back on. And there were times that I left her at home by herself, and there were times that I left her with people I didn't know. And I can tell you that, another guy came into my life, and he was the guy that loved me. And I didn't want anybody to say that they loved me because, that was a death sentence for my drinking. They would start questioning what I was doing, and I definitely didn't want that to happen. And he said, Amy, I want you to come home and meet my family. And he was from Maryland, and I was like, ugh, like that, I don't want to go home and meet your family. And I finally decided that I would, and I brought my daughter. And he had some surgery and had some pills, and I had a fake ID, so I'm drinking on the plane, and I'm taking these pills, and I don't even remember getting to the airport, to tell you the truth. And next thing you know, he's putting me in a taxi to take me back to the airport, and I have no clue what I've done, where I'm at. And I'm standing in an airport with this little girl, and there was a moment of clarity when I'm like holding this little kid's hand and going like, what am I doing? This kid is growing up the same way I grew up. And I got back home, and it was Christmas of '94, and I decided, well, I'm going to have the biggest and best party of all time because, if I'm going to, do anything to change my life, this is what I'm going to do. So I dropped my daughter off with her dad, and I write some crazy note that I read later in court that says, you don't have to pay me alimony or child support anymore. I'm moving to Australia, and I'll have her on my weekends or whatever. And went back to my house. Went to Burger King and bought one of everything on the menu. I don't know why I did that, but I always wanted to. And filled my car up with liquor all the way to the roof. And I was a Bacardi 151 drinker and Bacardi Breezers. So, the whole entire Chevy Chevette. I had this little Chevy Chevette that you had to park it on a hill, pop the clutch to get it to go. Had oil and antifreeze in the back, so you're always putting the fluids in that are coming out while you're driving. And this was the Hoopty Party Mobile, stickers on the headliner. And I decided that I was going to take all of my friends to Las Vegas because I had just gotten a credit card in the mail. So I'm taking everybody to Las Vegas. We're going to go party with Metallica. And I don't even know if Metallica was in Las Vegas, but that was what was in my head. So we are in the car going to the airport. We get to the airport. They won't let us on a plane. We weren't in no shape to be flying around. So I said, fine, then we'll drive. We'll drive to Las Vegas. And I vaguely remember my friends saying, Amy, let us out of the car. You're going to get us killed. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm playing Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, driving with my foot, with my head out the window, throwing empty Bacardi Breezer bottles into oncoming traffic, and got stopped. And the cop was like, you just ran that red light at 90 miles an hour. And I said, yeah, I just won the lottery. I won $1 million. And so I got out, took pictures with the cops, left my friends on the side of the road, went back to my house, and I got back to my apartment, and I'm like, what in the world happened to my apartment? And there's holes in the walls big enough to walk through, and there's a girl that's living in the same Team Teen project that I'm in with her daughter, and she comes in and she said, Amy, you did this. Like, you kicked holes in the walls big enough to walk through, and you took a baseball bat to everything in your apartment. And I said, oh, this is no big deal. Like, I'm going to Vegas. And so when I got married at 15 years old, my mom bought me this peach wedding dress because I grew up in a very religious home, and you can't get married in white if you're pregnant. So, I have this dress that goes all the way to the floor, and it's lace out to here, and I, for some reason, decide that I'm going to put my wedding dress on to drive to Vegas and my Doc Martens. So I put my hair in a bun on top of my head, and I get this wedding dress on and get into my little hoopty party mobile. And little did I know that my friend had called the police, and I vaguely remember seeing that cop in the in my rearview mirror, and luckily he moved because I wouldn't have stopped. And this is New Year's Day of 1995, and I'm driving down the main street in Colorado Springs, Kiowa Avenue, and I'm looking in my rearview mirror, and I see red and blue lights, and all I could think is my own personal escort to Las Vegas. And for a long time, I thought I was on a high-speed chase. It was really a low-speed chase. I found out from the police report that I was doing 30 to 35 miles an hour, like dodging in and out of traffic. And got onto the on-ramp of Bijou and I-25 in Colorado Springs and slammed my car into reverse and slammed into all the cop cars. They don't really like that. And jumped out of my car in my wedding dress, and they arrested me. And it's really, really uncomfortable to be in handcuffs, if you know. Who's been in handcuffs? Yeah, really uncomfortable. But try having this dress on that's like this big and having handcuffs on. So I decided to rip the wedding dress off. You know, it'd be a lot more comfortable to rip it off and put the handcuffs around the front of me. So I did that. And, yeah, they maced me and hogtied me and threw me in the backseat of the car. And by this time, all the news cameras in Colorado Springs are there. And my heart stopped. And I guess for a long time, I don't know, I was probably 3 years sober one day, and I'm talking to a little old-timer in a meeting, and I said, why did they even save me? Like, why didn't they just let me die in the backseat of that car? I woke up, I thought it was the next day, but it was really that day, and I was in a hospital bed, handcuffed, and charcoal down the front of my gown. I'm in this paper dress, and there's an officer standing at the door saying, Amy, you're in big trouble. And I'm like, what did I do? Like, I have a bruise from here to here, so police brutality, right? I have a case. And they said, you're in here for first-degree assault on 2 police officers, eluding the police, and, you know, like 12 or 13 other charges. And they immediately took me from the hospital to jail, and everybody in jail already knew me. Celebrity, 10 minutes of fame. And I got there, and I remember being in my cell, and this lady officer came up, and she had 2 black eyes, and she had tape across her face, and she said, Amy, do you remember me? And I said, no. And she said, you did this to me. And I was super scared, and I don't know if you know what it's like to be scared, but I'm psychotic when I'm scared. So I'm really unpredictable. I do things like keep everybody up in the jail all night, singing When the Saints Go Marching In, and everybody wants to kill me, and I'm stuck in solitary confinement by myself, and do crazy things like kick the wall and end up in a rubber room with a helmet duct taped on my head and leather cuffs so that I don't hurt myself, and none of that stuff deters me. You know, I'm in there, and I'm on suicide watch, and all I can think about is numbing the pain. They let me out on a PR bond 2 days after I got there, and I immediately went out and got rearrested, and ended up in solitary confinement for the next 65 days. I can tell you 30 days into the sentence, I got a paper saying ex parte, change of motion, you're a danger to yourself and others. And it was custody paperwork. My ex-husband had gotten custody of my daughter, and my life was over. I was like, I have nothing to live for. My kid would be better off without me. And I can tell you that I attempted suicide a few more times while I was in jail, and when you attempt suicide in jail, they take everything away from you. Like, you don't even get a pencil. And I'm sitting there in that cell, and I can tell you that I wasn't thinking about how could I get my life back. I was evicted from my apartment. I was kicked out of school. I was in school to be a medical assistant, and I was thinking, who could bring me a bottle of Bacardi 151? And a pack of smokes so I don't have to feel the way that I feel. And the day that I got out of jail, somebody was there with that bottle, and I don't remember leaving the parking lot of that jail that day. And for the next year and a half, I was to be homeless and doing all kinds of things that I said I would never do. I went down further and further, and the progression got worse and worse. And at the end of that year, I was arrested again for aggravated motor vehicle theft and domestic violence. I was looking at 4 years of prison time for all the things that I had done before that I was on a deferred sentence for, and I really didn't care. It was like a break from my life to go to jail and to be able to actually sleep and not have to do Groundhog's Day every single day. And so that was the end of 1995. A couple months later, I called my mom and I said, and this is a woman that I hadn't talked to in a long time. I'd left home when I was 14. I had turned my back on the church and everything that my mom believed in. I was sexually abused in the church, so I was like, nobody's here to protect me. My parents don't protect me, the people in church don't protect me, and God definitely doesn't protect me. And so, of all the people that I could have called, and I don't know why it was her, but I called her that day and I said, I want to die more than anything. And she said, have you ever thought about getting treatment? And I said, for what? I'm depressed. I just need a pill or something. And she said, I've looked into some places, and I actually have somebody here that wants to talk to you. And she put this preacher on the phone, and this preacher said something to me and said a little prayer, and I don't know what he said, but I remember the way that he made me feel. And I remember for the first time, I felt a little bit of hope. And she said, I found this 6-week treatment center for you. And I was like, all right, I can do 6 weeks anywhere. And I go into this treatment center, and they're like, no, it's 6 months. And I walk right back out the front door. I was like, I'm not doing 6 months. I'm 21 years old. I'm barely old enough to drink. I think I had 4 legal drinks. And they're like, well, we're gonna have to have a board meeting and see if we can even let you in because you're so young. And of course, then I wanted to be in there. And I'm gonna make a case. And I get in there, and about 90 days in, I hear all this stuff about alcoholism and drug addiction, and they were talking about control, controlled drinking, and if you ever switched and did this or did that, and I'm like, why on earth would you ever do that stuff? I drink as much as I can, as fast as I can, whenever I can. I'm not trying to control it. I'm not trying to switch or do anything else. I know it works for me. And so I decided that I was going to go out and try this controlled drinking because they said that was the only way that you would know if you're really alcoholic or not. And I'm like, yeah, this makes sense to me, go out on one of my weekend passes, go out and have a couple of Clue and creams, they're pretty mild, and go back to the treatment center, and my therapist is standing there, and I'm feeling so much guilt, and I really want to drink. So I tell her, I was like, I drank. I know you're going to have to kick me out of here. Go ahead and do it. And she's like, no. She's like, I believe in you, Amy, and I know you're going to make it. So I'm going to put my job on the line for you. You're not going to tell anybody that you drink. You're not going to change your sobriety date. You're going to stay here, and you're going to graduate from this program. And I think of all the times in my life that nobody believed in me, and I really wanted to please this lady. And so I did it. I stayed, and I graduated, and the month before I left that treatment facility, I found out I was pregnant with my second daughter. And it wasn't by anybody in the treatment center. That's the question I always get. So I get out of there, and the guy that I was dating before I went in, actually we were engaged, and he said, oh, I don't want any kids, and broke up with me as soon as I got out. And I remember this lady that I had met while I was in treatment, and she said, Amy, you can come live with me. And she ended up being my sponsor, and I'm living at her house, and I'm just like, my life is over. I'm a few months pregnant with this little kid, and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And I'm sitting in her house one day, and she was trying to convince me to tell her all the things that I did, and I was like, I'm not telling anybody all the things I could do. Do you know how much time I could get in prison for the things I did? I'm not telling anybody, a statute of limitations is not up for that stuff. And she finally convinced me to tell her some of the things that I had done. And so I did. And a couple days later, I heard her in the kitchen talking on the phone, telling somebody all the things that I told her. And I can tell you that it caused a lot of resentment for me, and like a person that I trusted for the first time ever, and I was like, this is ridiculous, like this program doesn't work. And a couple days later, I called one of my friends, the guy that I had been sleeping on his couch before I went into treatment, and he said, hey, Amy, a glass of wine would be really good for the baby. And I was like, yeah, a glass of wine would be good for the baby. I didn't even like wine, so I was sure that I could have one glass of wine. And so I went out to this bar. It was right next door to the AA club that I went to on a really regular basis, this bar called No Excuses, and walked in there. And I remember them pouring this pink liquid into this glass and me thinking, yeah, I could have one glass of wine. And next thing you know, I drank myself into a blackout. I'm in a hotel room with some dude I don't know. And the next morning, I'm picking up my clothes off the floor, and I'm like, really, Amy, are you really willing to lose another kid as a result of your drinking? And I had remembered my counselor telling me about this place called Vitality, and she said, Jim's there, and Greg's there, and Larry's there. Like, I know you don't like girls, so go up there and hang out with these guys. They're safe. And I remember her telling me that, and I remember walking up the stairs at Vitality, and I met these guys, and I immediately picked up my 6-month chip, because I had just gotten out of 6 months treatment. And, you're supposed to get a 6-month chip. And for the next nine years, I hid that drink. And I can tell you that in meetings, when people would ask me how much time I had sober, I'm like, can't you listen to these old-timers that say all we have is today? Come on. Why do you keep asking me how much time I have sober? And, I knew about that drink, but nobody else did. And it was killing me. But you guys didn't care. Nobody on the planet cared about my sobriety date except for me. And, I'm sitting in these meetings, and there's this little old-timer, Jim, and he's just this cute little old dude, that dresses up in Irish garb and, has this little suspenders and his little green hat and, kind of looks like a little leprechaun. And I had to sit by him in meetings, let me tell you. If you wanted to sit in my chair, it was not okay. I would move you from the chair because I needed to be next to Jim. And Jim would rub my back while I was pregnant, and I would walk up the stairs, and I was always looking like, what would Jim do, or what would Jim say in this situation, or what, he was my little old dude, and he would sit in the meeting, and he would say stuff like, get in your helicopter, Amy, and look at the big picture, see? The big picture's not so bad. And I was like, yeah, the big picture's not so bad. And he would say, turn it around, turn your thoughts around. And I'm like, I have no idea what this guy is talking about, but it makes me feel better. And I love sitting next to him. And he would pull out this little Listerine pocket pack in the meetings, and he would, give me these little Listerine strips. And there were times that I was so desperate in sobriety that I was like, God, I wish I could just be that little Listerine pocket pack, just peek out over his pocket, and I would be so safe. And I was wandering around the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, visiting you guys, because I couldn't work the process of the steps. I had so much anger and resentment, and I knew that there was nobody that I could trust. And, 4 years sober, I went back to Salvation Army because somebody said, Amy, go to Salvation Army and give back what was so freely given to you. And I was like, I hated it there. Why would I go back there? And I pull up, and there's this lady there, and this lady had come to every meeting that I had been to in the 6 months that I was in treatment. And she said, Amy, have you ever worked a 4th and 5th step? And I was offended. You don't say hi, I haven't seen you in 4 years. She goes, you're coming to my house on Saturday, and you're going to do a 5th step. And I had no clue. I did not know how to do a 5th step. And, all those years I thought I had been doing what I was supposed to be doing. I went to a lot of meetings, 3 or 4 meetings a day, and people were saying, meeting makers make it. And, luckily I was going to enough meetings that somebody caught me when I was about ready to fall through the cracks, because I was definitely doing the a la carte version of Alcoholics Anonymous, a little piece here and a little piece here and a little piece here. And thank God for those old timers, because I went out there and I did that 5th step with her, and I got to release a lot of that stuff that I've been carrying around. And relief, that's what it gave me, relief. And I got a lot of relief. I got a lot of relief from these Band-Aids that these old-timers were putting on me in the years that I was unable to do anything differently. And, I didn't know I was settling. I didn't know I was settling for less than what this program has to offer. And at 9 years sober, I talked to Jim, and I said, Jim, I don't know what to do about this sobriety date because, it's eating me alive. And he said, why don't you change your sobriety date, and encompass that blackout and tell people what happened. And I said, yeah, but then I'll have to tell my husband that I lied to him, and I'll have to tell my kid that I lied to her and, that I drank while I was pregnant. It was so shameful. And not too long after my 9-year sobriety date, the fraudulent one, I gave back all the chips and waited the 6 months to celebrate a new sobriety date. And I can tell you that was probably the most freeing thing that I've ever done in my sobriety. And not too long after that, Jim died. And I really didn't know that I had made him my higher power until my friend showed up at my door and told me. And I didn't think I could live. I really didn't think I could live in this world without him. And I couldn't function. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't taking care of myself, and I ended up in the hospital with stress-induced meningitis. And I wanted to die every day, and I had this big, beautiful life from the outside, let me tell you. But I was empty on the inside. And not too long after I got out of the hospital, I went back up to Vitality. And mind you, I had moved to Aurora by this time, and Vitality's in Westminster, 33 miles one way to this meeting. And I had to go to that meeting. That was the meeting that I had to go to. It was the only meeting I could go to. And I'm up there in a noon meeting one day, and I'm crying my eyes out, and this guy comes up, and he gives me a box of Kleenex, and I'm like, I have 10 years sober. I'm offended. He's like, do you have a newcomer packet? And what? Do I look like a newcomer? I know he had seen me at least 100 times. And one of my friends sat next to me, and he elbowed me in the side, and he said, Amy, you really should go ask that girl to be your sponsor. And I was like, for what? Everybody else is telling me I'm fine. Fine, you're fine. You have 10 years sober, you're fine. And he said, she has a really similar story to you. And I was like, yeah, nobody has a similar story to me. And, that terminal uniqueness was definitely in there. I was looking for all the differences. I think people were saying look for the similarities and not the differences, but I never heard that. So I was only looking for the differences. And I was that girl that came into the meetings and kicked chairs and went like this to people that were late. And, I was policing everything, trying to control everything so that I felt safe. And, I went over to this lady after the meeting, and she was surrounded by all these girls. And I was like, she doesn't have time for me. And she caught me out of the corner of her eye, and I didn't even know that she knew me. And she said, Amy, do you need to talk? And I said, yes. And she goes, let's go to Starbucks. And so we went downstairs, and we didn't make it to Starbucks. We sat in her car, and I talked and cried for the next 5 hours, and she listened. And I told her that I was thinking about running my car into oncoming traffic. And that every time that I left my house from Aurora and drove down to that meeting, I just wanted to die. And she said, have you ever worked the steps out of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous? And I was like, of course I have. I'm 10 years sober. Of course I have. And she said, I want you to come to my house on Saturday, and I'm going to read you that book. And I was like, oh, that boring book. Like I've tried to read it on my own. I didn't know that you needed an interpreter. Like I didn't know that. I didn't know somebody needed to read it to you and that you needed to look up words and that you needed to do all these other things. And she sat down with me and she goes, so Amy, what makes you an alcoholic? And I told her a lot of the things that I just told you. And she goes, no. I'm not talking about the consequences, Amy. Like you have a lot of consequences. And I thought, well, that's what it is, right? The more consequences you have, the worse alcoholic you are, right? And she said, no. Let's go back to that drink that you had while you were pregnant. And I said, what about it? And she said, you drank. You meant to have one drink. You didn't change your mind. Alcohol changed your mind. You didn't have a choice. And I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't have a choice. Because in and of myself, I would not have drank myself into that blackout. That was the loss of control, And I was like, oh, like now I'm starting to get it. 10 years sober, and the chain links are finally starting to come together. And I know people had said this in meetings, and I just never heard it. That phenomenon of craving kicked in for me. And when I started drinking, I couldn't stop, even if I wanted to. And I always thought I changed my mind. I thought I changed my mind to go out and get blackout drunk or end up in Mexico or on somebody's lawn or with some dude I didn't know. I always thought I changed my mind, and I didn't. That was a result of alcoholism. And so I'm sitting there and I'm doing this first step with her, and she goes, well, the big book says that I need to be clear that you're a real alcoholic before I take you through the steps. And I was like, okay. She goes, and I'm convinced. See, you don't have to worry about it. Because in my mind, I thought I could convince her that I wasn't. Maybe I just wasted 10 years of my life. And so we got to that second step, and that was really hard for me because she'd started reading the book, and she said, Amy, what's your problem with God? And I had told her about all these times that things had happened in my life where I felt like God wasn't there for me, and so there couldn't be a God. Like I'd been abused by the youth pastor in my church, and then a priest, and then, all these other dudes, and my dad's drinking buddies, and I just felt like I had this big V on my forehead that, every predator out there was like, here she is. And, I told her that. And she said, well, let's build a concept of God then. She goes, I want you to get your big book out, and there's a blank page on the front. And I want you to write in ink what your concept of God is. And I was like, I don't have one. Like, there's no concept of God. And she said, what about Jim? And she said, why don't you write down all the things that Jim was to you? And so I'm going to share with you a few things that Jim gave me and some of the other things that I've gotten over the years that I've been sober. He was forgiving. He was comforting. He was patient. He was creating. He was quick to forgive. And that must have been really important if I wrote it, like right next to each other, forgiving and quick to forgive. Like I needed that. He told me things like a sense of direction and power, peace, and happiness. Absolute, honest, pure, unselfish. Warm sunlight on my face. And as page 55 says that it can be just as much as a feeling for a friend. And so I can tell you that when I pray, I see Jim's face. And I see him in that helicopter above me, looking down and saying, Amy, look at the big picture, see? The big picture's not so bad. I heard a speaker say that you don't have to believe in God, but you have to look. And, I believe that I have to continue to look. And so I wrote these things on the front page of my book, and I continue to add to it, things like music and mantras and babies. Like, I don't know what it is about babies, but I can feel like so much peace and so much energy coming from these babies. And, the third step, where she's reading in the book and she's changing everywhere in the book that says God to higher power so that I can hear it. And we get to the third step prayer, and she said, okay, Amy, I know you still have a problem with this whole God thing, but are you willing to get on your knees and say the third step prayer as it's written? And I can tell you that that was the first time in my sobriety that I ever heard the word God, that I didn't feel like I was having a visceral response to it. And I said yes. And I got on my knees with that woman, and I did the third step prayer. And I can tell you that this peace came over me that I had never known before. And I felt like everything was going to be okay. And I thought about, like, all the worst things that could happen to, like, the other shoe dropping, and, if something happened to somebody that I loved or anything. And I just knew that I was going to be okay. And so she had me write a 4-step, and I had never really written an inventory that I was honest about. I'd gotten some of the bigger things out of the way, but I did this inventory, and I looked at all the things that I had done. And she said, "This is an inventory, and it's not an inventory about who you are, Amy. This is an inventory about who you're not, because you've been carrying around a lot of lies about you." And I got to see clearly about who I was not. And I got to see the things. She goes, "The 4 steps like a bowl. It's like a bowl of salad, and this salad has all the stuff in it. And the 5th step is about determining what you like in your salad." So what do you like in your salad? Well, I like a pretty plain salad, let me tell you. A little bit of lettuce, a little bit of tomatoes, maybe some carrots and some ranch dressing, maybe cabbage once in a while. But that's all I like on my salad. I don't like any of the fruit or nuts or any of that stuff in there. And I was carrying around all these fruit and nuts and, all these different salad dressings in my salad for a long time. And today I know what I like. I know what color I like, and all those things came out of working the process of the steps. And she had me do this fear inventory, and I didn't know how riddled I was with fear. And I let all of these things go, and I did a sex inventory. And I thought, I really thought that a sex inventory was talking about all the shameful things that you had done. And that's not what it was at all. It was about getting clear about where I was and how I had harmed other people with my conduct. And at the end of the 5th step, she told me that I needed to go and write out an ideal, this sexual ideal. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, pick the perfect man? That's what I thought I was going to write. This is the dude I want. And she said, that's not what it's about at all. It's about, what kind of woman does God want you to be, Amy? And she said, and I want you to pick the top 12 character defects that we pulled out of your 5th step, and I want you to write the asset that's the opposite of that character defect on your list. And those are going to be the top 12 things that you want to pray for every day, that God's going to help you be that woman that he wants you to be. And so I started adding to that list too, and I started adding lists like, what kind of mom does God want me to be? And what kind of wife does God want me to be? And what kind of sister does God want me to be? And what kind of friend does God want me to be? And what kind of sponsee does my God want me to be? And what kind of sponsor does my God want me to be? And how can I be the best in every hat that I have on this planet? And I got to write those lists, and I got to do these inventories, and I got to do a beliefs inventory and find out about these beliefs that I had about myself from the time that I was a little kid, that I was unlovable, and that if you guys really knew me, that you wouldn't like me. I was so afraid. I mean, the biggest reason I didn't change my sobriety days is because I was so afraid of the judgment that you guys would have on me because I drank while I was pregnant, because the judgment I had on me was worse than anything that anybody else said about that. And, so I did all these inventories, and I got clear, and she said, okay, we're making an 8-step list, Amy. And I'm like, oh, great. I have a lot of amends, and I definitely don't want to make them. And she goes, so you're going to write down every name that's on your 4th step and put that on the list. And this is a preparatory step, so you're going to write down, other names on that list that maybe you owe amends to these people that you had no resentment and connection with. And I was like, yeah, there are definitely some of those people. And I had a couple people in mind that I owed amends to, that I felt horrible every time I thought about the situation. There was a guy that tried to save me from myself, and he let me move into his place after he found me at work, and I had tried to kill myself once again. And he's like, I'm going to help you, but I don't want you doing, anything in my house. I want you to be sober. I'm going to help you. And I remember him walking into a situation at his house, and And it was bad. It was bad. And I remember the look on his face, and I remember how horrified he looked. And, I always wanted to let him know that I was doing okay. And I couldn't remember his name, Like all the years, I remembered that his name was Ross, but I could never remember his last name. And there was a day that I was at the hospital with one of my sponsees, and she had given birth to this little baby. And I went over to the little baby carriage, and I'm looking at this little guy, and I noticed on the name tag, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's that dude's last name. Just popped in my head, and I was like, oh. So I immediately messaged him on Facebook, and I said, I don't know if you know me, but I lived with you in 1995, and he was like, how could I forget? DEA had come in and raided his apartment, cut up all of his couches. Yeah, that was a nightmare. He left my boxes of belongings on the front porch, and that was back in the day of the pager, and the pager was 911, 911. And, of course, I didn't respond because I was sure there was something horrible going on that I did not want to know about. And I said, I really need to make amends to you. And he said, I don't know what amends are, but I would love to see you. And I set up a time to go see him, and I met him across the hall from this club that I go to on a regular basis. And I'm standing out there, and I'm nervous, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to make amends, thousands of dollars worth of damage, and I know I'm supposed to come in here, and I'm supposed to know what I'm going to do to make it right, and I'm still standing there, I'm praying, and I'm like, okay, God, what can I do to make this right? And he calls me, and he says, I can't make it, something came up at work, and I was like, of course, of course this happens. He said, I'm going to reschedule with you, though. And the next week we rescheduled, and we sat there, and I got to tell him about all the things I get to do today. I tell him that I'm in the prison every week, and that I get to sponsor these girls in there, that I'm grateful every day that I get to go in and that I get to come back out. And that, they approved me to go in there after all the things that I had done, after the felonies that I have, and, all the things that they let me go into that prison, and they let me be of service, and that my life depends on that. And I got to tell them about the girls that I sponsor, and I got to tell them about doing all the other service work that I do, and that I got to be part of CPC, and, I told him a little bit about that, and he knew nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was just, sitting there crying and saying, I can't even believe that you're sitting here alive in front of me, because all these years I thought you were dead. And I said, I want to make it right, and I know I owe you a lot of money, and I can give you $50 a month. And he said, you don't owe me anything. Your life and your service, stay sober, do this. And about a month later, he called me, and his brother was struggling, and I got to take his brother to his first meeting. And, I don't know about you, but that sounds like an amends to me. And so many times these things had happened. And remember I told you that I got arrested for aggravated motor vehicle theft. That was another guy that I had no resentment and connection with, and I didn't know how to get a hold of him. And, I'd been searching for him for a while, and my sponsor said, drive down to the last place that you knew that he was. And he was an insurance agent. He gave me fake insurance cards for my little hoopty party mobile, and, he was always the guy that was helpful. And if anybody knows me, I don't drive anywhere without, having it in the navigation. I'm geographically challenged, and I drove to Colorado Springs from Denver, drove directly to his office. Now, that's a miracle in and of itself. So I drive to his office, I go inside, and there's two guys standing there, and I said, yeah, is Greg here? And they were like, they gave me this really weird look, and they were like, no, he hasn't worked here in years. And I said, okay. So I called my sponsor, and I was like, I did what I was supposed to do, and she said, yep, it's water under the bridge. And I'm like, all right. So I did my part, and I get back home, and I have this message on Facebook, and this girl goes, yeah, have you heard about Greg? And I was like, it's really weird because I've been looking for Greg. And she goes, Google him. And so I Google him, and he is one of America's most wanted. And it says he could be in Japan or Costa Rica or Mexico or, any of these other places. And I was like, bright idea, like maybe I could go to one of these places and find him, get the reward, pay off the car, and have some leftover for myself. That hasn't happened, but I have been to a lot of those places. And, I totaled his brand new Dodge Stealth. And I'm like, how do you pay for that? Well, so that was another amends. And, my sponsor said spiritually awakened people stand ready to make amends at any given time, and that you never know when somebody's going to be in front of you that you owe an amends to. And I can tell you that I've done all the work around that. And if he ever shows up and he's ever in front of me, I will make an amends to that man. Some of the other amends that I've made, my daughter, the one that I lost custody of when she was 3 years old, I never did get custody of her back, although I'm a huge part of her life today. And I can tell you I was around 14 years sober, and I got a call in the middle of the night. It was like 2:30 in the morning, and it was from Denver Health, and it's one of the biggest hospitals in Denver. And I'm like, what sponsee is this that's calling me at 2:30 in the morning, like in the hospital? I'm going to wait for them to leave a message. No message. So I call back, or actually somebody had tried to call my home number, and nobody has my home number, and it's the same hospital. And I'm like, oh, this is really weird. And so I call the hospital back again, and I just asked randomly, like, is Autumn in there? And they said, we can't tell you because of HIPAA laws, but if you're her mom, you should get here immediately. And so I drive to that hospital, and I don't know anything about what's happened. And I'm around the corner, and my daughter calls me again, and she said, Mom, I've been in a head-on collision, and I'm 8 weeks pregnant. And she said, your number is the only number I could remember. And so I was the only one there. And I don't like blood, let me tell you. And I walk into this blood bath, and they're drilling rods through her leg, and her face is filleted open. And I see this little monitor on and this little baby heartbeat. And I got to stand there with her and hold her hand. And my husband came down to the hospital, and she said, Mom, can you guys just wash my hair? And my husband and I sat there with this bin of water, and he sat there and gently combed all the blood out of her hair. And something happened while I was in that hospital with her. I felt like I finally got to be her mom. And I sat in surgical ICU with her for the next 6 days, and luckily, I didn't Google anything, or I would have been even more horrified. And I got to take her home and take care of her. And a month later, she miscarried that baby. And I got to be with her for that, too. And I got to stay sober through all of those things. And I got to really be present for her. And a little over a year ago, she found out that she was pregnant again. And we were getting so excited. And I was crocheting a blanket for her. I'm sitting on my bed, I'm crocheting a blanket. My husband's like, you're going to be such a good grandma. And my daughter called me, and she was about 17 weeks pregnant. She said, my water broke, and I got to be with her again for a second miscarriage. I didn't have to drink over that either. These are the things that I had to do 10 steps on, where I was calling my sponsor, where people showed up, where you guys showed up in the hospital, and nobody left me alone, not for 1 minute. That I came to my house, and there were flowers there, and there was food, and people showed up and loved on me and called me to make sure that I was okay, and to make sure my kid was okay. And my sponsee showed up at my daughter's house with food and made sure that she was okay. And that's what this program has given me. It's given me a way of living that I couldn't have even imagined. The God thing has always been hard for me, And looking at Jim, looking at that beautiful gift that he's given me, every time that I think about him and every time I pray, I see his face. And, the 11th step has been really powerful in my life. doing prayer and meditation, doing the meditations that are in the book, waking up and asking to be divorced from self-pity. I know that once I become useful, that self-pity disappears. And if I have a grateful heart and I show gratitude by being in action, by doing things for other people, and in turn, people do things for me like this, like, I'm so grateful. Like, I get to be here with you guys. Look at the past that I came from. Like, why would anybody want me to come up here and talk to them? And, that 11th step has been super important to me. But the biggest important thing to me has been service work. It saved me over and over and over. When I was unwilling to do anything else, I did service work like my life depended on it. I sponsored people, and I got this group of girls together. I was sponsoring probably 8 girls, and I saw this lady speaking, and she was like, yeah, I have 25 sponsees. And I was like, I have to talk to this lady, because every time I go to a meeting, like 5 girls will ask me to sponsor them, and I want to sponsor them all, but I know I can't. And she said, I do group sponsorship, and I have a group on Tuesday nights, and I take everybody through the book at the same time, and I fist step with them separately, and we go through the concepts and the traditions and the 12 and 12. And I was like, that is something I can probably do. And so I started doing that. And I have a girl that lives in Jordan that I get to sponsor, and she calls me every week, and she does the homework right along with my other girls. And it's kind of cool because they all get to do like 10th and 11th steps with each other, and they have like a 11th step buddy that they call every night and do the 11th step, and it's just amazing, and one of the other amends that I got to make in my life was with my husband. Like, we were struggling, and I'd picked this man that was super separate from me, and he's not an alcoholic. He grew up in an alcoholic home, and he went the exact opposite way that I did, and we were struggling about 6 years ago, and I can tell you that he was telling me things like, celebrating your AA birthday is like celebrating Tuesday. And I was like, I am not doing this. Like, I did not get sober to be miserable or to have to justify going to a meeting. He's like, oh, you got to go to another meeting? And I'm like, you, the kids, the house, the car, nothing matters if I go back out and drink. Believe me, I'll leave it all behind. I've done it before. And he never saw me drinking. I met him when I was a year sober, and we were on the brink of divorce. I'd already talked to an attorney. I'd already talked to a therapist, and I was done. Like, I had one foot out the door. And I came home one day, and I said, I can't do this with you anymore. I want a divorce. And he said, well, he started packing first. And he called his friend, and his friend said, no, you can't stay here. Amy's the best thing that ever happened to you. You better make it work. And he came home the next day, and he said, what can I do to make it right? And I said, nothing. We've tried everything. We've gone to marriage counseling. We've done everything. There's nothing you could do. And he came home a couple days later, and I could tell that he had been crying. And this is a man that I had been with for, 15 years, and I had never seen him cry. And he said, please, Amy, what can I do? And I said, you can go to Al-Anon. And and you guys saved his life. You guys saved our life. He went to Al-Anon. He found a sponsor. He worked the process of his steps. He got clear about his stuff. And I can tell you that we went to our first convention together a few months later. And he went to the Al-Anon side, and I went to the AA side, and we came back together for lunch, and he put his arm around me, and he's not really a touchy-feely guy. And he said, Amy, I think it's time to start celebrating Tuesday. And that was 6 years ago. We're still together. We've been together for 20 years. And our youngest daughter just left for college. And a few months ago, my middle daughter, she, the one that I was pregnant with when I came in here, took a couple of bottles of pills and tried to overdose. And, I got to sit in the hospital with her, too. And I didn't have to drink over that. And And so many things have happened in my life that I've gone through that I didn't have to drink over. I didn't have to use over. I used the process of the steps to help me get through every single thing. Like if I have a fear, I write a fear inventory. And, if I have a 10-step, I do a 10-step with people. And I get to do all these things as a result of working the steps. I'd love to close my talk by reading something in the family afterward. My favorite promise in the book is on page 124. This painful past may be of infinite value to other families still struggling with their problems. We think each family which has been relieved owes something to those who have not, and when the occasion requires, each member of it should be only too willing to bring former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. Showing others who suffer how we were given help is the very thing which makes life seem so worthwhile to us now. Cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession that you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery. And I'm so glad that I get to get up here and avert death and misery. And maybe not for you, but for me, for sure. And my higher power definitely has a sense of humor. And the fact that that man that I married is a cop. And not one of the arresting officers either. He would have ran screaming from me. But, I want to close with this. And I don't know if Alcoholics Anonymous saved my life, but it sure gave me a life worth saving.